Hey guys, and welcome to another Hobby Tips. So this week we're going to talk about sculpting, I guess, or kit bashing, but using putties. It's something that you'll eventually get into if you're in the hobby for any length of time. There's going to come a point where there's going to be a gap, a seam that you need to fix up, or again, as I just said, kit bashing, you might get creative and you want to attach a different part to the model, or in some way change something, or even sculpt whole sections, or redoing whole parts, or even entire models. And so you're going to end up coming into contact with primarily two-part epoxy putties, and these are going to be I guess the join, the binder, the filler, or the material we're going to use to sculpt and so on. And so yeah, let's get into it. Let's have a little look and see what's there, and I'm going to give you my 2 cents on that. And just a range of products here. There's a lot here that aren't here that I'm going to talk about, but I've just got a few in front of me that we can have a look at. And it's a lot of information, so this is really just a little intro guide into what you might choose or not choose, and some pros and cons of some of this. And yeah, that's pretty much what I want to show. So let's start off with, I guess, the biggest boy in the room, the one that everyone's going to know when they get into the hobby side of things when it comes to sculpting or using putties, and that's green stuff. So here we have a couple of strips of it. Now, plenty of different companies, not just Games Workshop, sell this stuff. It's a two-part putty. You're going to mix equal proportions together. It goes green, hence the name green stuff, and you're then it's going to cure over time, and you're going to slowly harden, and you're going to sculpt with it, fill gaps with it, and so on. And so that's the one that you're probably going to look at first. But there are others. There's also, I wish I had some here, but there is also brown stuff. Well, it used to be called brown stuff. I don't know what it's called now, but essentially it's similar to this, but it's got a brown side and a silver side, and it actually has, well, it used to have, I don't know if it still does, but it have like metal like part shavings or micro particles in there. And when you mix that together, it actually worked really well for more hard surface stuff, and you can file it really well, and so you get a much harder edge. And I'll talk about consistencies in a second, but that's another product. Then you have things like Milliput, which unfortunately I don't have here, which is another two-part putty, which is very common in model making and so on. And we have another version here, which is the Tamiya one, and this is, I guess, somewhere between Milliput, which would be a very sort of more sort of water-based clay-like. You can add water to that to smooth it, and it breaks down, and it's sort of a bit like clay in many ways. And then you've got Tamiya epoxy putty, which is really nice, and somewhere in between, where it acts a lot like green stuff, which is the consistency when it's first mixed is a lot like chewing gum, so it's very difficult to work with, but it does harden over time, and it becomes easier to manipulate. And this is sort of a little bit more rigid, a little bit less like chewing gum than this, but not quite like the Milliput, so somewhere in the middle. So I actually really like this stuff, and if you haven't had a go at it, the Tamiya epoxy putty, this smooth surface one, is actually really, really good, and I would highly recommend it for a lot of tasks. It's actually really nice, and it has similar properties to the green stuff, but also the Milliput. So it's pretty cool. It's a good one, but you're probably going to start with the green stuff. So the costs of these things aren't very much, as you can see there, $12.99. But I guess what I would start with is probably the green stuff or the Tamiya. The Milliput is great, but it's not going to be good for sculpting, and you're not going to use that much. You're going to use that more on your bases, or if you find that green stuff is really difficult to use, what you'll notice with a lot of people online, you'll see it's like a sort of a light greeny color. You'll see some people sculpting with something that looks very light, doesn't look as dark as that. Well, that's because they're mixing Milliput with green stuff, and you get a sort of more, I guess, easier to work with consistency. And so that's sort of, I guess, a more advanced thing to start playing with different putties and mixing them together, which you can do. But for the purpose of keeping this simple, you're probably going to start with green stuff, or possibly this one here, which is another good one to start with, the Tamiya one. So I would recommend one of these two to begin with, just to learn how to do this. And you're going to mix them together, and then you're going to fill it into the area that you're working with. But what are you going to use to work with it? Well, you got a few things. So as I said, it's going to be a bit sticky, a little bit difficult with whatever you're going to work with. And so we have different ways to lubricate your tools and so on, which we're going to get into, which is this Vaseline here. And there are other ways to do that as well, including, good old water there. But we'll talk about that in just a second. So you're going to need some tools. So this collection here is an assortment of things that you're probably going to use. As you can see, these are well used. And what are they? Well, these are these little color shapers here. Okay, these are actually designed for things like graphite and pencil work and stuff like that, and you rub the pencil and create your shading and so on a bit of paper. Well, they actually work really, really great for sculpting, and so these are used in a lot of areas, not just for miniature sculpting, but they're really nice. You get these nice soft ends on them, and they're very good for doing just very subtle work. And there's different grades of them, so you have points, you have wedges, you have all kinds of different things, and the colors also represent different hardness levels. So the black one's the hardest, there's grays in the middle, and then there's a white one as well. The white one's not very good, so I wouldn't worry about that. I would either choose the gray or the black, and that will give you a good go. But they're all cool and they all have their purposes. You'll probably end up going more for this smaller size or this wedge shape. They're really useful. And the real advantage of these is that they don't, as I said, this is a lot like chewing gum. Your tool isn't going to stick to this very much. It's going to be really smooth and glide on the surface. And so for a lot of applications, these shapers are really, really useful. You can pick them up at any art store. Just go in an art store, you'll see them there next to the brushes. Go pick up a couple and you can start mucking around with them. They're cheap. They're only going to be like, whatever it is, between like, $7 and $12, something about the price of this putty here in most countries. And I would highly recommend a couple of those to get you going. And then you're going to need something a bit harder, so a metal tool. So this one here is an old school Games Workshop one. So back in the day they sold these. This is like super old school. This is like a relic, and it's still awesome and it still works. But essentially it's a dentist tool, and you can actually look up dentist supplies and get yourself one that's extremely similar to this. So it'll have like a knife edge on it like this. Okay, and you want something that has a bit of a blade on it. Okay, it's not dangerous, not that sharp. You can put your finger on it, it's not going to cut you. And at the other end, you're going to have this splayed end on it. I'll see if I can get that to focus. Is that going to focus? Yep, there we go. So you get this little splayed end. You need a nice flat end on it like that. You don't want it to have a round end for your first sculpting tool. You want something with a flat end because that's going to allow you to shape and flatten things out. Much easier for certain areas than this one will. So this is the kind of tool you're going to start with. And then if you want to branch out, you might get one like this, which is from an art shop, which they also have clay sculpting tools as well. You get packs like this, and I really love this one because it has a different end on it. So we have, this is getting into, I get the nerdy end of this kind of like collecting tools, but you get this kind of nice little pointed end, and it's a nice complement to the other one. And then you get this splayed out end, but it's rounded. So between these two, you can do basically any type of sculpting. And then in addition to that, we've got one with a double, this is actually a dentist tool, so I got this from a dentist supply place. So that has two different ways. Oh no, this actually might have been from a sculpting place, but it's very similar to a dentist tool. So you've got a couple of ends on it. And then finally you've got these, which are also from the art shop, and you'll see them there. I'm pretty sure art shops sell these, but these are like, I'm not sure what their original purpose is. They could be either to do with jewelry or to do with leather working or something, but you should see them in your art shop, and they've got these little ball ends on them. So if anyone knows what these are actually really meant for, you can put them in the comment, but any art shop should have these, and they have different size ends on them. They're just going to be sitting around there somewhere in amongst all the rest of these type of things, and you'll see them. And they're really, really useful. They're very, very useful for, doing things like chainmail sculpting and stuff like that on your miniatures for that small ball end there. But there's a lot of applications. You can smooth surfaces, you can do like stippling and so on. There's a lot of different methods you can use with these. So picking up a couple of these is really useful as well. But the main thing would be probably these clay shapers, or these color shapers that they call them, and probably one or two of these sort of dentist-like tools, which I'm not sure if Games Workshop still sells this, but you'll have to look in like your hobby stores, or a sculpting store might have some of these. That's where I've got some tools from. So you'll have to look that up and find one in your area. But you want a couple of these things, and that will work really well for you. And so what's the outlay? You're looking at maybe about, I guess you're probably going to invest about $50 to get you started with this type of thing. And that's going to allow you to fix models, to fill seams, anything like that. So I've got my, here's a little 3D print I got just to show you. So, you know, you'll have like a gap like this, you know what I mean? And then you're going to use your putty to fill that in once this is glued together. Or in the case of the body there, you'd be, you know, filling that up before you paint it so that you don't see it, you know, when you're painting it. So most miniatures will have gaps like that, and that's what you're looking at. But then, as I said, some of these things are sticky, and your tools are going to stick to them. So one lubrication to stop that stickiness is obviously water. But you will also use other substances like the Vaseline. So you get a little pot of this, and all you do is you dip your tool into the end of it like that. Okay, and you'll usually with your hand you'll rub a little bit off like this, and you just rub the end like this so that it's got a little bit of it on, and that's ready to go and do your sculpting. And so that's what you'll do. But you can also use moisturizing cream as well. Moisturizing cream works as well. So both are good, but you will have to wash off that stuff at the end, otherwise your paint's not going to stick to it right when you undercoat it. So that's one thing you got to remember, is that and sometimes in between layers as well, if you're using Vaseline and you're building up layers with green stuff, you're probably going to have to wipe off, or at least, you know, lightly wipe off with maybe a damp cloth or something to get rid of that residue. Otherwise, sometimes the next layers aren't going to bond, and also the paint won't bond. So that's one thing to consider when you're using stuff like this that isn't water. You're going to have to remove that after. So that can slow down your time. So if you can get away with water, do it. And as I said, these shapers here are going to be a lot less likely to stick to things. So if you can get away with that and the water and stuff, that's great. But if you do have to use the metal tools, then you're definitely going to want to have a little tiny bit of this on it, and it'll help stop it from sticking. So that's, you're going to invest in that. So yeah, as I said, probably about $50 will get you started, and then you can get into this. So yeah, there's some initial, I guess, thoughts on that and how to do it, and I hope that's helped at least get you started with a couple of these options. And as I said, your local art store, your hobby store, including Games Workshop, will have some of these items, but a classic modeling shop will have a lot of things like the Tamiya stuff, anything that sells like, you know, Gundam kits or World War II kits or anything like that, any hobby store like that, they'll have a lot of these items, and so you can pick them up and get started, or even online you can order it online, and that's fine too. So I hope that's helped getting you into it. This selection here is you know, only a small part. I'll warn you now, you can get really obsessed with this stuff and end up having a lot of these tools. It's fun to get some really cool ones, you know, for different jobs, or even make them. You can also make these yourself. So I won't talk about that here. This is only just a quick tips, just to expose you to some of the cool things that are out there to help you, you know, build and expand your hobby craft. And yeah, so I hope that's helped, and I guess I'll catch you on the next one.